Hi friends, hope you're well. Feel like I start all of these videos apologizing that I said I was going to do more and I never did. Apologize, have a lot going on here in our world, but yeah, glad to get back to it and wanted to share some thoughts today. Hopefully to dispel some confusion about the kingdom of God. And I certainly don't mean to dispel the confusion within, the global Christian movement. I just mean for some of you that I've had a handful of questions asked recently, and I thought this would be a good way to address a bunch of them, because they're related to the kingdom of God. And so, what I wanna do is sometimes those listening to the podcast, the Apocalyptic Gospel podcast, are going through other resources that I've had or some of my friends have done. They get hung up on the question of when is the kingdom. Understandably, I understand why, but kind of what I want to say is that that's not the question to get hung up on. The question to get hung up on is, what is the kingdom of God? What did the average Jew in the first century think the kingdom of God was? And in reality, what they thought is that, just to say it in a summarized fashion, they thought the phrase "the kingdom of God" was a term that referenced the Messianic age. The Messianic age, once the Messiah comes and he establishes a kingdom on Mount Zion and he raises the dead and the wicked are judged, etc. So why do we get all the confusion about the kingdom? That's way too complicated for this video. What I want to say is there were two kingdoms in the book of Daniel that I think are going to help us sort out some of this stuff. So beginning in the book of Daniel, you have in chapter 2, you have the vision. You guys remember the vision of the statue? And then Daniel interpreted the vision and showed him everything, because the king had the dream. Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. And so what happens is Daniel, when getting the interpretation, because he saw when he saw the vision that the dream had, or that the king had in his dream, there was a rock cut out of the side of a mountain, and it was a stone, and it was cast at the feet of the statue. The statue crumbled, and that rock became a giant mountain that filled the whole world. And so this becomes, as Daniel gives the interpretation to the king, he says, what you saw is that the God of heaven will establish a kingdom in the time of those kings. In the time of those kings. Now what happens, of course, is those kings are all crushed at the same time. So it's a particular generation, right? I realize traditionally those are interpreted as this kingdom, then this kingdom, then this kingdom. But I don't think that matches either that vision or future visions in Daniel, where they talk about a number of kings, but then they all are crushed together. So it seems to be talking about a specific generation. So that said, Daniel 2:44 gives this explanation. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and a kingdom which will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all of these kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. So one, it was the expectation of something that God was going to do in the future. Why is it important to say God's going to do it? Because a phrase developed between this time and the time of Jesus called, and we know it as the kingdom of God. And in Greek, as it's interpreted in the New Testament, the basileia tou theo is a way of saying, you could say, the kingdom of God, meaning the kingdom that belongs to God. But the other way that genitive is used is it could literally be translated, and I've read several scholars that have actually suggested it should be translated the kingdom from God. Because we use the word of that way sometimes. It can mean possession, or it can mean the place of its origin. Like we say, like Clement of Alexandria. We don't mean that Alexandria owned Clement. I mean, that's where he's from, right? And so in the same way, this is most likely what the phrase kingdom of God meant. It's communicating that God is the one who's going to establish it. It's the kingdom from God. And which also might help account for how you have in the book of Matthew, we have a frequent reference to the kingdom of heaven. And scholars say it's because he was avoiding using the name God. Unfortunately, he uses the name God like 80 other times. He just doesn't like to use the name God in context to that phrase. And this phrase right here might explain the reason. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. So it's both the kingdom that comes from God, but it's also the kingdom that comes from heaven, because coming from heaven is a little bit of a way of saying that something is coming from God. So that said, so there's one kingdom in Daniel. It's a kingdom that's coming in the future that God is going to set up miraculously, and when he sets it up, it's going to be with a bang, right? It puts an end to those wicked kingdoms. And we have that reiterated later in Daniel 7, that the God of heaven is going to give the kingdom over to one like the Son of Man. And it's going to be given over to the saints of the Most High. That's cool. But both, what's similar about those is they both talk about a kingdom coming in the future. It's a kingdom that's coming on the earth that God will establish one day at the expense of these other kingdoms. They will be crushed on that day. Okay, kingdom number one. The second kingdom in Daniel, we find it in Daniel chapter 4. And Daniel chapter 4 is right when Nebuchadnezzar kind of regains his right mind and he comes to himself and he recognizes the God of heaven. And this is what he says, starting in verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language that live on all the earth, may your peace abound. It has seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me, the Most High God. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion is from generation to generation. So that's another kind of kingdom. That's a kingdom that is already there in Nebuchadnezzar's day. The other one sounded like it was coming in the future. And so there's another way of using the word kingdom that simply means that God rules over everything. How do we know when one is being addressed and not the other? Well, it's actually quite easy. Is it a current reality, or is it coming in some way? Are we to anticipate it, or are we simply to recognize it and bow? Right? Well, like the rabbis used to use the phrase frequently, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, or the yoke of the kingdom of God. And what they mean by this is the yoke of being under God's authority, and they called the Torah, embracing the Torah meaning embracing the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. And so in many Jewish writings, they use that to describe accepting God's rulership and God's role of the sovereign in their situation. And that their role of submission to God's kingdom and authority was to obey the Torah. And yet, that's not saying that it's coming in the future. That's saying they're recognizing that it exists and has existed for all time. This would be the second kind of kingdom, right? The second kind of kingdom where it's not something that's coming. We're not to look for it. We're not to anticipate it. We're not to live in light of its appearing. There's a very different kingdom communicated by Jesus and the apostles. And it was at hand. It was coming. You had to live in light of it. You had to, and they spoke about it continually, but they spoke about it as something that was coming, not something that had been around for all time. And I think therein lies some of the confusion. We read Jesus, and if you read Jesus as saying the kingdom of God is coming, and what we interpret that is to say, if what we interpret that to mean is that God's sovereignty over the heavens and the earth is about to appear or it's about to increase, none of those things are true. God has always had absolute sovereignty over the heavens and the earth. That's not coming. It's not increasing. We don't need to figure out how it's going to come. What they mean when they're talking about the kingdom of God coming or being at hand in the New Testament is they're talking about Daniel 2. This messianic kingdom that is being anticipated by the prophets, and we expect it and acknowledge that it's going to come, and we live in light of its appearing. Why do we live in light of its appearing? Because it comes with a bang, because it comes at the expense of these pagan rulers that are going to be oppressing Israel, and worldwide Jewry, and at some point, even the Gentile followers of the Messiah of Israel. And so this isn't a very complicated one, but I hope to be able to clarify the big distinction in understanding what the kingdom means can be found in these two kingdoms in Daniel. The first one is one that's coming. It's coming apocalyptically. The God of heaven will do it sovereignly. No one will help him. And it will come and it will be hurled at the feet of these other kingdoms in the visionary experience. It will crush and bring an end to these pagan empires that are oppressing Israel. The other kingdom is something that's always been here, that men always ought to live in subjection to, is that the God of heaven rules over all. And we must recognize his leadership and live in light of the things that please him. And so I hope this clarifies it a little bit. Some of the kingdom confusion that I've been hearing about, that I've been getting messages about, and so I thought that I would make this video and hopefully clarify a few things. So I hope very much that this was helpful, and that you are all doing well as we transition out of the cold winter into the spring, summer months. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to some of the things that are coming up, and I pray the Lord is near and close to your families, and that he be with you during this season. So shalom, friends. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or concerns that I can help with. Shalom. God be with you.